You're listening to Mom and Doc Talk, where we talk all things healing pans and pandas with an emphasis on homeopathy. Hi, and welcome back to Mom and Doc Talk. You got just Jody and I today. We've had a lot of really fantastic guests, but we wanted to make sure we had a couple of sessions in between our really amazing guests where we're really just diving into some of the deeper questions about homeopathy. Again, because we know that having all of the information that's available to you is important, and making sure you understand all the details about our areas of expertise are also important. So today, Jody wanted to talk about a question that she's seeing a lot in the PANS and PANDAS community, which is about the different types of homeopathy. Classical homeopathy versus lots of different types. There's lots of different names for various different approaches. And so we're going to talk about them to the degree that we can today. So Jody, the first thing that I think is important that we talk about is that while we focus on our experience and our expertise with classical homeopathy, there is not one exact way to necessarily find healing for your child, right? Our experience and expertise and what we talk about in what we expect from responses for kids and the ultimate results that we're looking for is based in classical homeopathy. And so that's what we're really making sure that we understand, that we're clear on, that you might see a different response or different just differences in what you're doing if you're using a different approach to homeopathy. And I'm going to be like really honest. Like, part of me is, I've talked about this with a couple of other people who are classical homeopaths that are just like, the biggest frustration that we have is that homeopathy means a specific thing, right? It's a specific form of medicine that was understood and sort of like written down and put together by Samuel Hahnemann, and it's based off of the law of similars. And there's a lot of people who call things homeopathy because of the dilution of the dose, and that's not what makes something homeopathy. It's how it's recommended. So our biggest thing that we've talked about a couple of times is that we just wish it was called something different, because there can still be benefit for people, and people find good results for various things, for specific things, using dilute forms of medicine with a different approach for how it's prescribed or how it's recommended. It's just, you're not going to necessarily get the same outcomes with those things. And so I just wish it was called something different, like potentized medicine therapy. I don't know, or just calling it isopathy, which is what a lot of those things can end up being. So what's been confusing you, or what are you seeing come up that you want to make sure I clarify? Where should I start?
Well, at first, I think I should excuse anyone that just doesn't understand what classical homeopathy is. I would say we were about probably 7 months into Avery's healing journey, and I still did not, and this is back when there was no education, I still didn't know what classical homeopathy was, like, at all. Like, I would hear you say the words, but for some reason, I was too embarrassed to ask you because I felt like it was a really basic thing that I should know. So just like very, very basic, what does it mean? Because I think there is a lot of confusion.
Yeah. So classical homeopathy is based off of the law of similars and then using the minimum effective dose. Those are like the two primary principles with homeopathy, is the law of similars and the minimum effective dose. This is where I think a lot of people get stuck on, like, the minimum effective dose is what makes something homeopathy. That's not what it is. It's how it's recommended. So it's based off of, if something has been studied in humans to be able to cause similar symptoms to what you are experiencing in an unhealthy state when they take it as a healthy person, then you can use that with that law of similars to heal the similar symptoms that you're experiencing, right? It doesn't have to necessarily be the exact same thing. And this is one of the places that gets caught up a lot, is the use of nosodes. So nosodes are homeopathic remedies that are prepared from disease substances, right? So you could use, some people use the strep nosode and think the strep nosode is all you need to take for PANDAS, because if it's caused by strep, then you give strep. But that's actually not a law of similars. That's isopathy. That's the same, right? And the reality is, if you've got a bunch of people who have strep, they're going to have a different presentation of it, right? So some people are going to have, like my husband recently had strep throat, and what he needed to actually get him moving in the right direction was Mercurius corrosivus, right? But that's not a common strep remedy. It's because it was specific to his presentation. So it's not like strep itself might desensitize you to strep, but it's not going to necessarily address your specific reaction to something, right?
Mhm.
So using something that is the same to treat the symptom isn't necessarily going to address the susceptibility. It's
Mhm.
more likely to address the sensitivity to that thing. It could help that.
Mhm.
But it's not as likely to address the susceptibility as a whole person. So with classical homeopathy, we're using the homeopathic remedy that has been shown by studies in humans to cause in healthy people similar symptoms to what you're experiencing. And then when your body pushes against it, it's going to have the opposite effect, which is where we see the stimulating healing response, right? Does that make sense, Jody? You're giving me a little bit of the look like maybe it
No,
doesn't.
it does make sense. I can see where some newer to homeopathy folks might get a little confused.
Okay.
And I'm thinking about the episode we recorded about what is
Primary and
it?
secondary
Primary
action.
and secondary.
Yeah.
That might help with
Yeah.
understanding.
So go check that out if what I just said was really confusing to you. The goal with classical homeopathy, single remedy based off of the totality of your symptoms that is likely to stimulate the body to heal with that primary and secondary action, where the primary action of the medicine, the secondary action being the body pushing against the medicine that could cause something similar. So
Mhm.
it's pushing the opposite against what it could cause. Um, and it takes you as a whole person into consideration, right? And I'm going to tell you right now, I've never seen a kid with pandas that only reacted to strep because they all have PANS, right?
Yeah.
It might start with strep, but then it's mycoplasma, and then it's mono, and then it's mold, and then it's the chemicals that are used in the classroom, and then it's EMFs. It's they just are more and more sensitive. And so if we're using something where we're just addressing one trigger, we're going to address one trigger. Um,
Yeah.
not differently than if you're going to use an antibiotic. Like you might, well, I guess I should back up. It is different in that you could actually address that trigger. But you're still going to chase the next trigger and the next trigger and the next trigger
Mhm.
because you're not addressing that overall susceptibility and the specific way you react to that particular trigger.
Yeah.
Um, so that's one thing that's like a different form that people will use no-sodes in a non-homeopathic way. You can use no-sodes homeopathically based off of what you've studied when somebody has been given that particular remedy and seen what it could cause and then clinically verified what it can treat. So we do use no-sodes clinically. The reality is we don't, in Resilience Naturopathic, we don't use the strep no-sode because it hasn't been studied well enough. That's another thing, is that classical homeopathy is based off of hundreds of years of practice and hundreds of years of evidence that have been where we've done tests in humans for use on humans and then had clinical verification. So it's not, so there's some other forms of homeopathy where people are using their intuition for what they think somebody needs based off of something they might talk about or something they're showing interest in, or like maybe an interesting way they're sitting or walking. And so um, there's a form of homeopathy where there is a lot of focus on just like how somebody's presenting and if they're like an animal, a vegetable, or a mineral, that kind of thing. That that's not based in classical homeopathy, and some people see success using that, whether it's luck or if there's some uh skill that those people have that I just don't personally tap into. Um, Classical homeopathy is really looking at the literature, like just piles and piles and piles of literature that has spanned centuries, to show that it is effective for use in these symptoms and in these particular cases. So there's some people who will also use combinations, like multiple remedies at a time. And that's not, again, not in alignment with classical homeopathy, because you need to have studied what the effects are of that medicine on that person. And when you combine things, it's a different medicine, right?
Mhm.
So if you like, if you're not just going to eat salt separately from like, sugar and flour and eggs and butter and chocolate chips, and it's not going to taste like chocolate chip cookie, right? But if you mix them all together, it's going to taste like a chocolate chip cookie. Each thing individually is going to taste a whole lot different, and it's going to have a whole lot different impact on your body than if you, even if you ate the exact same amounts that would go into a chocolate chip cookie. When you put it together, it's a different entity. It's a different thing that has a different way that it interacts with the body. So when you do combinations, you are not actually using something that you understand how that combination itself is going to work with you, right? It's the same thing with like medications. Like medications on their own can have one impact, but then it interacts with another to have a completely different impact on your body, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's one thing that comes up with combinations. Some people do find combination remedies work, and I think in those cases, they have a robust enough response to homeopathy that they're responding to one remedy in the combination. But then afterwards, what do you do? Like, which one was it? And how do you manage that moving forward, especially for a chronic case? I think that they're mostly effective in acutes when you're not sure which thing it is, and you're basically throwing spaghetti at the wall and figuring like what's going to stick. Um,
Yeah.
and so the acutes are where you're just trying to make it shorter and a little bit less miserable,
Mm-hmm.
than where you're trying to actually heal from a chronic condition. So combination is generally not going to be as effective. And what you can see happen is that the body doesn't know which thing to respond to, even if you're separating them from over time. It's like, wait, you're telling me to go left. Now you're telling me to go right. Now left, now right. What am I supposed to be doing? How do I get to the ultimate finish line?
Mm-hmm.
With classical homeopathy, you can use different remedies. Multiple different remedies are often needed in chronic cases. They're just taken one at a time and not like alternating in a day, or like one on Monday and one on Thursday, and then the same one again the next Monday, and then on Thursday, the second one. Because that tends to be confusing to the body. You see it through, and then when you're not responding to the remedy that you're currently on, and you need a different remedy, then you stop the one you're on and you switch to a different one, with classical homeopathy.
I feel like that has to be why it's working so well for so many PANS kids.
Hmm.
That singular and slow and kind of gentle process. Because I look for evidence that other styles of homeopathy are working, and it seems like to me it's just more suppressive
Yeah.
or more confusing.
It's generally not fully suppressive, but it could be palliative. So there are
Okay.
some forms where you're going to see
Palliative.
relief of symptoms, but it's not actually making progress in healing, where you're just like you keep taking it. But if you don't take it, the symptoms come back.
Mhm.
And so that's more likely to happen than like bigger levels of suppression with homeopathy. Um, I think that another thing that is sometimes thought to be homeopathy is like, anything that's protocol based is not classical homeopathy. So anything that's like, for this, you take this and this and this, that's not classical homeopathy. Some people can find relief with that, especially in things that are less dynamic disease. So like, there are like protocols that can be really beneficial for something like surgery, where most people are going to have one of three different outcomes. Just sort of like you're sent home with like three or four different medications, and like, here's what you take if it's really bad. Here's what you take if you have nerve pain. Here's what you take for just general inflammation. It's You can have a similar thing because most people are going to have a similar process. And that's where it's less dynamic. So protocols are more useful in less dynamic disease, not as much in individual complex chronic disease.
Yeah.
Um, there can be some protocols that have their foundations for how they're chosen based off of the same resource materials that we'll use for selecting a single homeopathic remedy. So it can have some foundations in classical homeopathy for its recommendation. Just again, how it's applied matters, whether it's classical homeopathy or not. And again, could still be effective even if it's not following classical homeopathy, because of the nature of like, depending on what you're using the protocol for.
Yeah. I
Um,
feel like I want to reach out and grab anybody that has decided that homeopathy didn't work.
mhm.
If you've got a PANS and PANDAS child and you have tried a style other than classical homeopathy, and you have decided that it didn't work, or you saw that it didn't work, I want to encourage you um, to give classical homeopathy an opportunity to do it a little bit different way and accomplish what you were trying to accomplish in the first place. I just say this because I've talked to so many families over the years that were doing homeopathy, and they, you know, get to resilience and they're kind of reluctant about it and like, whatever, like we'll see. And they've gone on to be very successful with classical homeopathy. Just a different approach just worked better. It wasn't
Yeah.
that homeopathy didn't work, it was the approach.
Yeah. I feel like we should probably also talk about like detoxes. That's a protocol, but it's a very specific protocol that comes up a lot, or a specific type of protocol that comes up a lot, where people are given, usually it's isopathy, where they're given like, oh, you had exposure to this particular mold, this particular medication or vaccine, or this particular infection. So I'm going to give you the same thing, and you're going to do a protocol to try and clear it, or this heavy metal, that type of thing too. So where it's a lot of times it's isopathy that is being done, not specifically homeopathy, again, because it's not using the law of similars, um, and it's not being individualized to the person. Um, for some people, they find some good results with that. They find that they're less sensitive to it, and that they're feeling better. Um, Again, we're focusing on that question of, is it ultimately meeting the goal of reducing or eliminating the specific susceptibility, so you don't have to see this again or see a new one pop up,
Mhm.
that use just another detox protocol that you'll have to go to. The reality is that homeopathy, classical homeopathy, does help with detoxification of any of those things that you might be trying to target with a protocol, because it's stimulating your body to heal, including your innate detoxification pathways, and it's focusing in on your specific reaction to that toxicant that you're trying to address, right? So, um, again, we could all have the same toxic exposure. We could all get arsenic poisoning and not have the exact same symptoms. There's going to be some overlap, but there's going to be a lot of differences too. And that's based off of our individual circumstances and our individual susceptibility. And that's where classical homeopathy comes in.
Yeah, I think too, I love that you say arsenic, of course, because arsenic was one of Avery's issues. And I think like a really easy, like mom splain of all of this is whenever we started homeopathy, you could have given, or another style of homeopath could have given Avery a remedy or remedies to help her body detox the arsenic. But instead of doing that, because that's probably all we would have been doing, we would not have been addressing the reason why her body didn't properly detox it as life was going on its own. So instead we use classical homeopathy, and that worked on a deeper level, not just the, hey, let's detox what's going on right now, but the deeper level of what's going on in the past right now, and also what's going to be happening in the future. And let's look at it and heal it with this slower singular process. So in the future, we don't have to come back and do another round of detox. We've got a body that is healing really well. And this is one of the things I love about the whole MTHFR part of Avery's healing, because she was like a terrible detoxer. I was doing all of this stuff and going through this process and allowing her body to slowly heal itself, slowly detox at the same time at a kind of rate that her body could handle and not have a big freak out. I do nothing now. Her body detoxes just fine on its own. Whatever was going wrong with her methyl cycle is now working really, really nicely and on its own, even without methylfolate or any type of detox support. So the classical to me is such a more long-term
Yeah.
thing, and it's addressing the reason why it's all happening.
Yeah. Yeah. You keep saying slower. And I think that the reality is that like people hope that other approaches might be faster because they're targeting a specific thing. And it, for some people, maybe it is. And maybe that's the approach that their particular body needs. And maybe they don't need to worry about anything else. Maybe that's the only thing that they're susceptible to, and addressing that specific sensitivity or susceptibility is satisfactory, and they won't have any other things come up. I don't know that that's really any faster, right? Like it might feel like it's faster because you feel like you're targeting something. And I feel like I say control every single episode. And here's another episode where sometimes it feels better because you feel like you're controlling something
Mhm.
versus allowing the body to do what it needs to do
Oh,
when it needs to do, and just trusting in your child's body or your own body if you're on your own journey, to get where it needs to go if you're not trying to force it to get where it needs to go. And that can be hard,
that's
right?
such a hard thing for us as parents because it feels like I'm leaving my kid just sitting in this pool of arsenic.
Yeah.
And it, I mean, in the end, it ended up being I think the only way we could have gotten Avery out of it because I tried the other ways and it was really ugly.
Yeah.
So,
And sometimes it can be, I've talked to several other homeopaths, even outside of Resilience Naturopathic, who have had some interaction with Pans and Pandas kids. And like we've all found that like sometimes the more you've tried with like all of these different, like throwing spaghetti at the wall, um, it can sometimes slow things down in the long run because the body's just, I don't know, like, I don't know exactly why. I haven't figured out why, but it's just, I don't know if it's overwhelmed, if it's confused, if it's been given too many nudges and it's not sure how it's supposed to respond anymore because it's just been, I don't know. Um, so there's other different types that people that I'm not familiar with all of the different like things that people say. There's like sequential prescribing. I've mentioned intuitive stuff. There's the sensation method, which is one of those where you're trying to figure out like, does a person fit into like animal, mineral, vegetable? There's protocol based. There's, cease therapy, which is trying to remove the reactions that you might have had to any vaccines. There's I think those are the main ones, that anything that is beyond meeting the person where they're at in the moment, using the law of similars and the minimum effective dose with an individualized medicine, is not classical homeopathy. So even if there's some areas where it could be based in classical homeopathy, with the information that's used to make the recommendations. Um, I do think it's probably important to say that there's a lot of different ways that a person can analyze a case to get to the remedy, using classical homeopathy. So they can use, various different approaches, like, or different reference tools to get there, different ways that they're really looking at the case to try and figure things out. Um, but as long as they're giving the single remedy indicated for the individual based off of the law of similars and a minimum effective dose, the way they get there is not as important as that specific thing. The Again, law of similars for the individual and a minimum effective dose. Does
sounds
that
good.
answer it, Jody? Do you think
Yeah,
that? Okay.
I think it
Oh,
does. And if anybody's confused, they can ask questions. And if we need to come back and clarify, we can.
that's true. That's true.
So this was very confusing to me for a very long time.
Well, hopefully we're not both talking from a place where we understand it. So we're talking in circles about things that we understand that other people don't. Please let us know if we did, so we can make this more clear for you, because I think this is an important concept, just to understand. And like I said at the beginning, do what works for you, right? Like, do what works for you. If another approach aside from classical homeopathy is effective for you and it's working, that's fine. Just know that when you're interacting with us, we're coming from the perspective of classical homeopathy, and anything we talk about, in the impacts that we're seeing or the outcomes that we're seeing, we're coming from the classical homeopathic perspective. Um, there's no one right way to do everything, and like, there's a place for whatever works for people in healthcare, right? Including higher levels of treatment that, we've talked about on other episodes, and we'll continue to talk about when people need additional support as well. So all right, Jody, I think we're good with this one.
Yep, I think so.
Okay, all right, we'll talk to you guys again soon. Take care, everybody. We hope you found this episode helpful, hopeful, and inspiring. We try to get a new episode out every week. You can make sure you don't miss any by following us on Spotify or subscribing to our channel on YouTube. If you want to connect with us more, join our Facebook group, Homeopathy for Pans and Pandas, where we have exclusive weekly videos and answer your questions about, you guessed it, Homeopathy for Pans and Pandas throughout the week. If you are already a member, give us a shout out and let us know what you thought about this episode. If you aren't on Facebook and would like to reach us, you can email us at podcast@resiliencенaturopathic.com. Until next time, take care and remember, this won't be forever.